Hello, everyone, and welcome to Inside the NFL Front Office, an exclusive new show from BikeFans.com that gives you a peek into how and what decisions are made in NFL scouting and personnel departments. And to help it simplify, quite frankly, for me and for all the fans, I'm pleased to welcome our resident draft and free agency expert, Geoff Nichols. Now, Geoff, welcome to our inaugural show. First thing first, have you received your first check yet from us?
Well, I don't know if I've received my first check, but, hey, there's always time for that. But thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to this.
You know, Geoff, there was a point in time in the 80s and 90s that boxers started selling their body, so they put a tattoo on their body to advertise for somebody. If we get that offer, we'll forward it to you quickly so you can please the fans and the sponsors.
Absolutely. There's a tattoo parlor about 2 blocks down from where I live, so I can quickly run down the street to get that media cash flow coming in as quick as possible.
I'm loving it. Well, listen, today on the show, we're going to talk more about NFL free agency, especially that first week to 10 days and what happened. And as we get closer to the NFL draft on April 27th, we'll delve into the prospect that you think may fit the Minnesota Vikings, as well as maybe some of the other NFC North rivals. Sound good?
Absolutely. No, this should be great.
Okay, well, let me start you off with this. Most NFL fans, they fancy themselves talent experts. They know who should be on the team. They know who that diamond in the rough is. But I'm going to admit it, I really can't tell the difference between a number one overall prospect playing for an Ohio State and the best of Division III. So what I want to know from you, and probably fans do too, is what do you and NFL scouts and GMs look for when evaluating who is the best at, say, maybe the wide receiver position?
Sure. I guess maybe I can speak in terms of kind of where I start. I mean, I've had conversations with scouts around the league and some higher up front office executives. And, they're very open to answering those types of questions of how can you refine your vision of players. Really the first thing where I really start to break it up. I mean, the media does a good job of kind of putting players in perspective, of kind of giving you a realm of players. So you're already kind of chopping some off the top there. That you can come back to later. But I really break it up. So if you're looking at wide receivers, I mean, the first thing you really look for is natural hands catchers. You're making sure players aren't double catching the ball, seeing how they track the ball in the air, how many missteps they have as they're tracking the ball in the air. You want to see them free flow towards the ball. You don't want to see them move towards the sideline, then back towards the middle of the field once the ball is in the air. I mean, it's different when you're trying to separation. The other thing you want to see is how they attack the line at the line of scrimmage. I mean, whether they're a player that can get off press, whether they like to be touched, I guess. Players in the NCAA can easily get rubbed off their routes, so paying attention to those type of little things. Then you really kind of can start looking at the nitty-gritty of saying how well do they perform in contested catch situations? Are they willing to attack the ball in the air and go over the defensive back when, they need to make a play on the ball? And then, you look at some of the maybe not quantitative factors and maybe more qualitative. How is the quarterback? How does their scheme affect how they're playing, and how does that translate to the NFL, just to name a few?
Yeah, and I assume that the fallback position for fans is, if it's especially the wide receiver position, when in doubt, select a Mike Williams. He seems to come up every 5 years from some team. Is that right?
Yep, Mike Williams. You never know who the best Mike Williams is, but, there'll always be one every few years.
Absolutely. And, you talk about it. I mean, we have to delve into it. And I asked Pete Bursich this the other day. Laquan Treadwell. I mean, you are certainly a person capable of evaluating his talent. You did see him last summer in training camp, which was the most extensive action we've seen. Were you surprised in what you see, or was he about where you thought he was going to be for the NFL?
Surprisingly, I think he was where I thought he would be around the training camp preseason time. I mean, people forget that wide receiver is one of the hardest positions to really transition into in the NFL. You're taking a player who's played in a collegiate offense, which is more wide open than an NFL system. And, the talent disparity week to week in the NCAA is clearly different than the NFL. I mean, one week you could be playing small Division I school in the South in the early season, and then you're going against SEC talent. And I mean, in the NFL, you're always going to be going against someone's, number 3 cornerback in Treadwell's case every week. So there's clearly a change there. I mean, in Treadwell's case too, he isn't a player that's the burner, and he's going to be able to consistently burn players down the field. I mean, he needs to feel out how to get separation against NFL defensive backs. There was moments in the preseason that, he did that, but there's room for improvements. I think the injuries are really what detrimented him in 2016.
I'd love it to be, Chris Carter wasn't a burner, and you'd like to see him be something like that. But one of the things he did, he had a bit of the dropsies as well. If he gets that under control, is Chris Carter the type, again, not Hall of Fame type, but is he that type of possession receiver that can make those catches in traffic?
Yes, he showed it in college. I think the difference between Chris Carter and Treadwell is Treadwell is going to be used more underneath. I mean, in an ideal world, Treadwell can evolve into that type of receiver. But even if he just becomes a consistent red zone threat, I mean, maybe you don't need him to be as explosive between the 20s. If you can get into the red zone and you can consistently, isolate him on the outside and he can run against the smaller defensive back and you can, run different various post and fade routes to him, maybe that's where his bread and butter is. I mean, it'll be nice to see him on the field more consistently.
Yeah. Well, it turned into the backfield. Obviously, the Vikings added Latavius Murray in the opening week of free agency. Two quick questions on him. What kind of performance would you expect from Murray in offensive coordinator Pat Shurmur's offense? And is Latavius simply a placeholder or a short-term fix until the Vikings draft a feature back?
To answer your second question first, I don't think Latavius Murray is the long-term answer. I think that's partially why the Vikings had a 1 year out in the contract as well. So if you're not aware, Latavius Murray and the Vikings can both get out of his contract after 1 year, which, I mean, I think is a win-win for each party because you're probably wondering, sitting on the other side, why the heck would Latavius Murray ever agree to that? But the running back market in free agency was not good this offseason. So the ability for him to get out of it and hit the market again potentially next year could be beneficial that way as well. So I think the Vikings will be looking at drafting another back that can be maybe a more well-rounded member rather than running with a committee with Jerick McKinnon. But what to expect out of Murray? I mean, a lot of what you saw in Oakland, to be completely honest. He's going to be someone who can run between the tackles. He isn't going to break many tackles, but he's able to run through contact. So what I mean by that is if you need a yard or two, he's going to be able to get you that. If you're going to need 5-6 yards, he isn't that type of back. I mean, he shows explosiveness here or there, and he can pick up his blocks well. But, the Vikings struggled tremendously in short yardage situations last season. 3rd and 1, 2nd and 3. Not being able to convert on those types of possessions just kills an offense. And bringing in a back like Murray, who's successful in those types of situations, clearly is a step in the right direction.
I think the fans will like that because too often, Geoff, last year, we'd see 3rd and a foot, and we might as well have been better off to just punt right there.
Well, to be completely honest, you can't really deny that. I mean, just the consistency in the failure and in being able to convert short yardage situations was just frustrating. I mean, it's not only frustrating to fans, but think about it from an offensive line perspective. Even the times where they set their blocks correctly, the back would stutter, and all of a sudden it's a 2-yard loss. It's like you just couldn't get out of the mindset that they weren't convert.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the running back, and maybe there's somebody who's more well-rounded. I was a little surprised when I heard Coach Mike Zimmer comment this week that he was intrigued by Joe Mixon, the running back from Oklahoma, with all the off-field issues. Were you surprised by that? And do you think he is, in fact, the type of right fit for the Vikings, if not in round 1, maybe round 2?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And was I surprised? No. Because I really think from a front office perspective, you need to give each player your due diligence. Regardless of the media stance that people take as no one will draft him, or, he clears, he'll be on most players' board. Well, I mean, I'm going to guarantee you he's not going to be on every team's board. And I can also guarantee you that some team's going to be willing to draft him as well because of just how talented he truly is. So not doing your due diligence would be foolish, in my opinion. Was I surprised? No, because if you look at the players that Cincinnati was able to take, Vontaze Burfict, for example, no one was willing to touch him. I mean, it takes one coach or one team to say they're willing to work with a player and take that risk, and people can get on board with it. I mean, I think the Mixon situation is slightly different because as much as a coach or a general manager can be in the court of saying, we love Joe Mixon, it really will come down to ownership. And the ownership's going to have to sign off on it because there is going to be backlash in the media. There is going to be a firestorm, right after the draft, through preseason. And then finally, when that player hits the field in the regular season and performs, then finally people will probably start to be quiet. But I mean, there's a long time between the draft and the regular season. Mixon's fit with the Vikings. I mean, he is a natural fit in Pat Shurmur's offense. He's the type of back who can pick up yards on the ground, but he also is a very potent receiver as well. The one thing when I watch Mixon on film is he's such a refined route runner, which is not something you see in running backs all the time. And not only just underneath someone who can run out into the flats and, catch a screen here or there, but he runs refined routes down the field, and that's truly valuable in today's NFL.
Yeah, and you see this all the time, Joe. This guy reminds me of somebody. For those fans who just don't follow college football as much, who does Joe Mixon remind you of?
That's a really good question. I mean, the natural one the media draws to is Le'Veon Bell, but the one I'm drawn to is more towards Fred Taylor. Actually,
okay.
Of all people, the way Fred Taylor was able to leverage his blocks is very similar to what Mixon does. What I mean by leverage his blocks is Mixon doesn't try to just break off, massive chunks of yardage. He takes it one blocker at a time and one defender at a time. For example, you'll see him run to the outside, and he beats the inside guy who's chasing him with speed. Then he sees, now he has one blocker in front of him and one defensive back. Well, the defensive back's on the outside, so he slides to the inside. Then he bounces it outside because the safety who bounced inside once he saw Mixon move that way, and then he beats him with speed. So he breaks it off chunk by chunk, and that's something Fred Taylor was very good at in the NFL.
I'll be honest with you. If I'm Mike Zimmer and certainly Pat Shurmur, if you tell me I'm getting Fred Taylor in his prime, I'll take that. How about you?
Absolutely. I mean, as much as you'd like to say is comparable to Fred Taylor, each player is their own, but you can only hope that the impact would be the same.
No doubt. But I'll tell you what, whoever lines up there, whether it's Murray, Mixon, or somebody else there, they got to have a line to block. And we know that was problematic last year. And when I talked to Pete Burcich earlier this week, he said that the offensive line immediately improved with the addition of tackles Riley Reef and Mike Rimmers. And he said it was because of their consistency. Not that they don't have weaknesses, but they're consistent weaknesses that they can game plan for. As you look at these new tackles in this tandem, did we improve over Matt Khalil and TJ Clemmings, and why?
I think Pete really hit something with his comment to you about how they improved to be consistently better. And that's kind of the way I feel as well. Riley Reef isn't a world beater. He isn't going to stand out there at left tackle and win his battle all day long every single game. What he will do is he isn't going to let players go through him, and he's going to play fundamentally sound at left tackle and not let people, he's going to make the defensive end work for it. And that's something you didn't always see last year. I think, to be completely honest, last year is a little abnormal in the sense that the Vikings had absolutely no consistency along the line either. I mean, not knowing who's going to play next to you every week can really wear on a player and as a unit. So having that consistency as well, I mean, is going to help tremendously. So I think from a starter perspective, yes, Reef and Remmers are dramatic upgrades at offensive tackle, but you have to remember that the depth behind them, all it takes is one or two injuries again this season, and you're really back in the same place as before. So there's still work that needs to be done.
And would you add that in the second tier of free agency? Would you look to the draft? I know it's hard to put a rookie person in there as well in that depth. How would you handle that if you were Minnesota?
At this point, I mean, it's really going to come down to the draft. I mean, the interior line is somewhat of a strength in this draft class. I mean, the offensive tackle class is clearly underwhelming at best. But I mean, finding another developmental player and kind of hedging your risk. I mean, you're going to always want to keep developing what's on your roster, but being able to find, someone else in the draft that you can develop as well will be important for this team, just to create the depth and hopefully eventual starters for the team.
It's interesting. One of the things at the end of the year is some rumblings that Joe Berger at 35 would retire and not come back. Haven't heard anything more about that. But is this center position Joe Berger's, or is this now Nick Easton's?
Good question. I mean, in my personal opinion, I was not blown away with what Nick Easton did at center last year. Does that mean he can't improve? Absolutely not. I mean, he could come in this offseason with some playing experience now and be a whole new player, or have taken great strides in the right direction. But I think the Vikings do have to start, looking towards the future at center and bluntly the interior line as a whole of how they want to construct it. I mean, Berger is very well will be the center this year, but I would take that with a grain of salt until you know how the Vikings approach the draft, because Berger has guard flexibility, and if they find a center they like, early in the draft, I mean, I don't think Berger would preclude them from taking that player.
And like I said, I mean, you never know what they're going to do for the depth. You hear a lot about the injuries. Obviously they counted on Mike Harris last year. You're right. I mean, it's all about bodies, I think, and quality bodies, because anybody can go down. And last year certainly proved it for the Vikings.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a front office, your goal is to obviously put the best roster on the field from day one. But you know going into it that that's not going to be the roster you finish the season with. I mean, you're always going to have changes in the lower end of your top 53, just for various depth moves and players on your practice squad who are being attracted to different teams. But really the goal in mind has to be, regardless of who you have at every given position, I mean, finding someone to beat them out. I mean, that should be the goal, regardless of the position and who's in place right now.
Yeah, no doubt. Now, it turned to the other side for a moment on the defense. It gets a little bit more crowded each day in the Vikings defensive line rotation with the free agency addition of Dayton Jones from the Packers. Now, he was one of those guys, workout warrior, buzz of the draft a few years ago, but many of the scouts thought he was just too raw for the NFL. He did seem pretty ineffective in the Packer defense, although he did move from the line to the linebacker a little bit. Where do you see him playing, and does he have the upside to reach the potential he had when he came out in the lower first round a few years ago?
Yeah, no, I mean, I actually was very happy with the Dayton Jones signing. He's someone I had kind of pinned on my own personal board as a potential Vikings fit going into the offseason. Just a young player with upside who wouldn't command top dollar on the free agent market. But Dayton Jones did struggle coming into the NFL for the reasons you specified. He was very raw. And I mean, he didn't have a natural position in a 3-4 defense, and that's what the Packers had drafted him into. In the 4-3, he has a bit more of a natural fit, to say the least. The Vikings can move him along the defensive line. I mean, I think ideally they'd like him to add a little bit of weight to play the 3 technique spot. But I also think that he still has the raw physical abilities to slide in at defensive end if needed as well.
Yeah, well, you talk about the 3 technique, you talk about the interior part of the line. I got to ask, and you may not know, is what in the world's going on with Sharif Floyd? I mean, we heard, somewhat of an injury. There've been rumblings about cartilage problems and things like that. Is he in the future, or is he just biding his time until retirement takes him out with the injury?
I think really both the Vikings and Sharif Floyd are kind of walking in the dark in regards to his injury. I mean, this isn't his first injury to his knee. He's struggled with injury problems his entire career. And I think if you just kind of naturally look at the facts of 300-pound linemen, knee problems, and look at prior track record of other players in a similar situation, I mean, it's not good. I mean, it's unfortunate because everyone has seen the upside Sharif Floyd can have in the defense here or there. So that's not to say that he can't recover and potentially come back. But I think from a front office perspective, it's also hard to plan on him being the long-term player at the 3 technique as well. Just having someone you don't know when they're available is hard, both on a coaching staff and a front office, because you need to, spend more in the depth behind them and kind of hedge your risk a little bit. And at some point, you eventually have to say when you have enough, and you're going to kind of turn the page and look for that next piece.
Yeah, from what you understand, is the injury more severe than they thought, or is the recovery longer than they thought, or yes to both maybe?
From what I've kind of understood, is there was some complications in the recovery based on the prior injuries he's had to his knee. It's just like it's the consistency to the knee injuries that's caused more problems than the injury or cleanup they had itself.
Okay. Well, I got to tell you, I'm going to take you in a different direction to close out the show today. We have one that I'm pretty sure Rick Spielman is losing a lot of sleep over, and that's the loss of punter Geoff Locke. Geoff, I got to tell you, he was somewhat more consistent last year, but he still ranked in the middle of the lower half of the league in most punting categories. Will he be a bigger loss than some think, or is a punter a punter?
I think there's a little bit of it's a kind of a two-way street. I think the biggest impact he'll have is having to redo the special teams timing on the kicking unit, just because he was the holder. I mean, you'll have to find someone to plug in there and get them on board, because I mean, Kai Forbath, even though he came in midseason, I mean, him and Geoff Locke obviously communicated on what he preferred as a kicker. And I mean, maybe that's a moot point because maybe Kai Forbath isn't even the kicker next year. I mean, maybe he gets beat out in the potential competition, so they just have a whole entire new unit. But Geoff Locke did. He started off the season very strong. I mean, punting indoors has always been something that's been a strong suit for him. No surprise, an indoor club in the Colts found him. I'm sure they had the lowdown on that. But
Sure.
I mean, a punter's a punter, but at the same point, there's more to those changes than meet the eye.
I guess what I'm asking is, if I put in a couple of good months' work out in the backyard, do I have any shot at this punter position?
I mean, I think it would be foolish for the Vikings to look over you. I mean, they better be overturning each rock. And I mean, with your nephew being a kicker prospect, I mean, there's some genes there as well. So I think you're well on your way.
I hear you. I'll be with my agent tomorrow. And I got to tell you, Geoff, that brings us to the end of this week's edition of Inside the NFL Front Office. But we'll return in 2 weeks as we look over some of the other free agency moves in the second round of free agency and begin breaking down the positions of need in the Viking roster. And for our listeners, please post your questions and thoughts in this thread for Geoff's show, and he'll reply and interact with you. And don't forget to follow Geoff on Twitter @VikeFans. So until 2 weeks from now, for Geoff Nichols, I'm Tom Moore. So long, everyone.